My name is Megan Parker, and the exact second my mother-in-law realized I remembered how she killed me happened under a ceiling of red paper lanterns at our Lunar New Year banquet, when I leaned into the microphone and said, "Before we toast, family, I need to correct the story you told after my death." Her smile didn't fall at first. It just stiffened, like a mask that suddenly felt too tight, because everyone in that ballroom thought they knew me. They thought I was the American wife who couldn't adjust, the career girl who wouldn't learn, respect, the woman who fell down a trail because she was too stubborn to listen. They didn't know I'd already died once in this family. They didn't know I'd woken up in my own bed 3 years earlier with the taste of blood in my mouth and a scream trapped behind my teeth. They didn't know I'd been living these months like a long, quiet countdown to this moment, collecting proof the way some people collect prayer beads. And they definitely didn't know the woman sitting at the front table in a silk hanbok Sunhee Park. My husband's mother had tried to make my first death look like an accident. But I knew, because I was the accident. And this time, I wasn't falling for it. When people hear reincarnation, they think of candles, spiritual music, some soft, glowing moment where you wake up wiser and grateful. Mine was none of that. Mine was pain. Mine was darkness and panic, and the sound of my own heartbeat scrambling like it was trying to run away from my body. In my first life, the last thing I remembered was the smell of pine and wet earth on a family hike, the way my sister-in-law Gina's laugh echoed too brightly, the way Sunhee kept insisting we take a photo by the overlook, and my husband Daniel, standing a few steps away, distracted by a phone call, not seeing the way the two women in front of me had angled their bodies like a wall. Then the shove, not dramatic, not a movie throw, a firm, practiced push to the small of my back, timed with a fake gasp and a chorus of, "Oh my God." My boots hit loose gravel. My stomach lifted. The sky tilted. And as I went over the edge, I heard Sunhee's voice clear and calm right before she screamed. "Megan, no." Like she hadn't just let go. Like she was mourning instead of finishing a job. I remember hitting something hard. Twice. Rock. Root. Rock pain blooming white hot in my spine. Then a strange weightlessness. I remember thinking, absurdly, I'm going to break my teeth. And then the world went quiet. The official story was simple. Megan Parker Park was stubborn. Megan Parker Park refused to listen. Megan Parker Park loved work more than family. Megan Parker Park insisted on hiking in bad weather. Megan Parker Park slipped. Everyone nodded along. Because accidents happen. Because it was easier to believe in a tragedy than in a plan. Because my in-laws cried in all the right places. And Daniel looked so shattered in his black suit at the memorial that no one wanted to ask hard questions. But I didn't slip. I was pushed. And I knew it, even as I died. Because as the darkness closed, I heard Gina whisper to Sunhee, too close to my ear, for anyone else to hear. "It's done. Now he'll come home." The second life began with a jolt. I woke up in our old apartment in Bellevue, Washington, 3 years earlier, sitting bolt upright so fast my neck hurt. My sheets were twisted around my legs, damp with sweat. My heart was slamming against my ribs like it had been running. Daniel rolled over beside me, half asleep, and mumbled, "Babe, you okay?" His voice was familiar in the safest way. His arm reached out, searching for me, and when his hand found my waist, I flinched so hard he fully woke up. He blinked at me, confusion creasing his forehead. "Meg?" I stared at him, alive, warm, breathing, not standing on a trail with his phone pressed to his ear while I fell. I put my hand on my own chest, feeling my heartbeat. I touched my face, my teeth, my neck. No blood, no broken bones, no cold rock under my cheek. Then I looked at my phone on the nightstand. The date. 3 years earlier. A full 3 years before the hike. 3 years before my death. My brain tried to make it make sense. It didn't, but my body understood before my mind did. I'd been given time. Not a blessing. A weapon. I slid out of bed on shaking legs and walked into the bathroom, flipping on the light like I could burn the nightmare away. My reflection stared back, 31. No scars. Hair messy. Eyes wide. I whispered, "I died." The woman in the mirror didn't answer, but she didn't look surprised, either. It was like she'd been waiting. I leaned over the sink and vomited, hard, like my body was trying to purge the memory. When it was over, I braced my hands on the counter and forced myself to breathe. In, out, And then, very quietly, I said the first vow of my second life. Not again. In the first life, I tried so hard to be good. Good daughter-in-law. Good wife. Good American girl who didn't make waves in a family that worshipped calm surfaces. I'm not exaggerating when I say I'd studied their rules like a language. I'd met Daniel at a fundraiser for a community health clinic downtown. One of those Seattle nights, with drizzle on the sidewalks and people pretending they weren't cold. He was funny and gentle and steady. Korean American, born in California but raised in Washington after his dad got a job at Boeing. He worked in supply chain, and he spoke about his family with equal parts love and exhaustion. She's intense, he'd said about his mum, smiling like it was a joke. But she means well. I believed him. Because I wanted to. Because I grew up in Ohio, with parents who believed family dinner was pizza on a Friday night, and the idea of a close family sounded comforting. When Daniel proposed, he did it at Kerry Park with the skyline behind us, and I cried like a cliché because I meant it. I meant every promise, and the first year of marriage wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then Daniel's dad had a minor stroke, nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare everyone. Sun-hee called Daniel sobbing, and Daniel, being the kind of son who took guilt like oxygen, said, "We should stay with them for a while, just until Appa is stable." Just until. Those two words are the most dangerous words a woman can hear. In my first life, I said yes. I packed boxes. I moved into their house in Federal Way, an immaculate split level that smelled like kimchi and pine sol and quiet judgment. And from day one, I was wrong. Not wrong because I was cruel, or lazy, or disrespectful. Wrong because I existed as myself. Sun-hee watched me like she was taking notes. The way I folded towels, the way I rinsed rice, the way I greeted elders, the way I spoke to Daniel. If I worked late, she'd sigh dramatically and say, "In our culture, wife comes home for family." If I made a dinner reservation, she'd say, "Restaurants are for people who don't have love at home." If I tried to help, she'd move my hands aside and say, "No, like this. You don't know." And Gina, Daniel's younger sister, was worse because she smiled while she stabbed. Gina was 28, newly divorced, living at home with her parents, and a resentment that sat under her skin like a rash. She treated me like an intruder who'd stolen her brother. She'd call me Meganse, in a tone that made it sound like an insult. She'd laugh when I mispronounced a Korean word, then turn to Daniel and say, "You should have married someone who understands." Daniel would flinch, always caught between me and them, and he'd do the thing men like him do when they hate conflict. He'd soften the woman who was hurting and excuse the one who was doing it. "Babe," he'd whisper to me in our room. "They don't mean it like that." But they did. They meant every bit of it. And in my first life, I kept trying anyway. I kept my job because I loved it. I was a project lead for a healthcare tech company, the kind of work that made me feel useful and smart and alive. Sun-hee hated that. She wanted me home. She wanted me available. She wanted me quiet. The pressure built like steam. Little comments turned into demands. Demands turned into fights. And fights turned into something colder. A plan. Because the night before the hike, the night before I died, Sun-hee stood in my doorway and said, very calmly, "If you don't become a real wife, you will destroy my son. I will not let you." I remember laughing, stunned. "You can't control that." Her eyes didn't blink. "Watch me." Then she walked away, her slippers whispering on the hardwood like a warning. The next morning, she suggested the hike. Fresh air, she'd said. Family time. No screens. It sounded harmless. That's what made it lethal. In my second life, waking up 3 years earlier, I finally saw the pattern with brutal clarity. They didn't want me as a person. They wanted me as a position, a role, a service. And when I didn't fit, they decided to remove me. I stood in the bathroom that morning, water running, and I made myself a deal. I would play nice. I would smile. I would say, "Sure," and "Of course," and "That sounds great." And while they believed I was the same, Megan soft, eager, apologetic, I would build my case. Because revenge without proof is just rage, and rage is easy to dismiss. Proof is not. I walked back into the bedroom and looked at Daniel again. He was sitting up now, rubbing his eyes. "Nightmare?" he asked, voice thick. I forced my face into something normal. "Yeah, just stress. He reached for me. Come here. My body wanted to recoil. Not because Daniel had harmed me in my first life, but because he hadn't protected me. Because he'd stood there while his mother and sister tightened the net. Because love without action is just a story. Still, I let him hold me. Because I needed him close. Because part of revenge is letting people think you're safe. Today's Thursday, Daniel said after a moment. Mum wants us for dinner this weekend. Of course she did. In my first life, that weekend dinner had been the start of the escalation the moment Sun-hee announced, in front of everyone, that I should quit my job. And I remembered exactly what she'd said, because it had been the first time she humiliated me publicly. Megan is so smart, she told the table, smiling. But smart women know family comes first, so she will stop working soon. Right, Megan? Every face had turned to me, waiting for my answer like it was a test. I'd laughed awkwardly and said, "We'll see." Sun-hee's smile had sharpened. Gina had smirked, like she'd won something, and Daniel had stared at his plate. That was where I died the first time. Not on the trail, at that dinner, when I realized my marriage had witnesses who would never testify for me. So in my second life, I smiled and said, "Sure, dinner sounds great." Daniel looked relieved. He kissed my forehead like that fixed things. It didn't, but it bought me time. The first thing I did was build a system, a private cloud folder Daniel didn't know about, a notebook with dates and quotes, a burner phone, cheap and simple, hidden in a shoebox in my closet, a separate bank account, because I knew what was coming. I knew they would try to control money, housing, insurance, narrative. I knew they would call me unstable, because when you challenge a family's power structure, the first weapon they use is your sanity. So I began quietly building a paper trail of my own stability. Therapy appointments, not because I was broken, but because I wanted records of my mental health. A new primary care visit, documenting that I was healthy. A meeting with a lawyer. Just a consultation. Just planning. Her name was Marisol Chen. She was sharp, calm, and she didn't flinch when I said the word reincarnation, because she didn't need to believe in it to understand the rest. "Tell me what you're afraid of," she said. I stared at her office wall, neutral art, neutral carpet, and said the truth. "They killed me once." Marisol didn't blink. "Okay," she said. Like I told her, my neighbor stole my packages. How? And I told her everything I remembered. The hike, the shove, the insurance policy Daniel didn't know existed until after my death. The way Sun-hee and Gina acted at my memorial, sad in public, calm in private. The whisper, "Now he'll come home." Marisol's pen moved steadily. "We can't prosecute a past life," she said gently, "but we can protect your current one. And if they try anything now, we make sure it's not your word against theirs." I swallowed. I don't want to just survive. I want them to pay. Marisol's eyes met mine. "Then we do this clean. No illegal traps. No lies. We let them reveal themselves. Exposure," she told me, "was a leash for people who lived off reputation." I left her office and bought a door lock with a code. Small cameras, carbon monoxide detectors, and a dash cam telling Daniel it was for safety. He shrugged. "Sure. Whatever makes you feel better." He didn't realize how true that was. I also bought a recorder, one that looked like a pen, because my first life taught me something. If you don't record it, it didn't happen. Not to them. Saturday came. We drove to Federal Way with a pie from Safeway and a bottle of wine. And I put on the sweater Sun-hee liked, because it made me look soft. Sun-hee opened the door like a queen receiving tribute. "Megan," she said, smiling too wide. "You look tired. Working too much." I smiled back. "Just a busy week." Gina came down the stairs, phone in hand, and hugged Daniel while barely touching me. "Oppa," she cooed. Then, to me, "Hi." Her eyes did that quick scan hair, clothes, posture, like she was checking whether I was still obedient. At dinner, Sun-hee served Daniel first. Always. Then Appa, then Gina, then me, last, with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Halfway through, Sun-hee set her chopsticks down and said, "So, Megan, about work. In my first life, this was the moment I started dying. In this life, I lifted my water glass calmly. What about it?" Sun-hee smiled. "Daniel told me you want to apply for that promotion." Daniel blinked. "Mum, I'm proud." Sun Hee said, cutting him off. But a wife's job is not to chase power. A wife's job is to build home. Gina snorted softly. In America, women forget that. I turned toward Gina, still smiling. In America, women also pay mortgages. The room went still. Sun Hee's eyes narrowed. So you won't quit? I set my glass down. No, I won't. Sun Hee's voice went sweeter, which meant more dangerous. If you don't become the kind of wife this family needs, you will make my son suffer. There it was. The same threat. The same line. This time, I leaned forward. Then we should talk about expectations, I said gently. I'll contribute. We can make a schedule. But I'm not giving up my career. And we're not moving in permanently. Sun Hee blinked, surprised. Boundaries, she repeated like it was a dirty word. Yep, I said, smile bright. I'm American. Gina's lips curled. Then maybe you should have married American. Daniel flinched. Gina. Stop. Sun Hee's eyes stayed on me. Daniel is my son, she said softly. And you are temporary. In my first life, that sentence shattered me. In my second, it clarified everything. So I nodded once and filed it away like evidence. Because plans leave footprints, and I was going to follow every single one. On the outside, I stayed polite, helpful, calm. On the inside, I collected. I hosted Thanksgiving at our apartment because Sun Hee loved to perform, and performances needed an audience. Halfway through the meal, Sun Hee stood and announced, without asking, that Daniel and I would move into her home after New Year, so Megan can learn to be a real wife. Gina smirked. Daniel went pale. I laughed softly. That's not happening. The silence snapped like a rubber band. Sun Hee's smile froze. Excuse me? That's not happening, I repeated. We're staying here. Sun Hee slammed her hand on my table. Plates jumped. You are my son, she snapped at Daniel. You do not let your wife disrespect me. My best friend Kayla, born and raised in Seattle, loud in a way that made bullies nervous, sat frozen on my couch, eyes wide. Sun Hee turned back to me, voice sharp. If you don't move in, you are not family. I leaned back and said, very clearly, then I guess I'm not. After they stormed out, my apartment felt too quiet. Kayla exhaled. Megan, what the hell was that? That, I said, tired, was tradition. Daniel sank onto the couch, hands on his head. Why did you do that in front of everyone? I stared at him. Because she did, I said. She cornered me with an audience. That's her favourite move. He looked at the floor. She's my mum, and I'm your wife, I said softly. I need you to act like it. That night, I uploaded the recordings to my folder. Not because I wanted to hurt Daniel, because I wanted the truth saved. Because in my first life, the truth died with me. Sun Hee escalated. She started calling Daniel's HR, crying about his stress, suggesting he needed time off, suggesting I was controlling him. Then she used the emergency key Daniel had given her and let herself into our apartment while I was at work. My camera caught it all. She walked through my living room like she owned it, opened my pantry, mutters in Korean, then straight into my bedroom. She opened drawers, held up my lingerie like it was evidence of a crime. Then she found the shoebox where my burner phone was hidden. She froze with it in her hand, eyes sharp, then put it back carefully, and left. When I got home and watched the footage, my blood went cold. She knew I was preparing, which meant the clock had sped up. I called Marisol. She broke into my apartment. Do you have video? Marisol asked. Yes. Good, she said. File a police report. My stomach clenched. Daniel will hate that. Megan, she replied. If you want to survive, stop managing his feelings, more than your safety. I filed the report. Not about murder, not about reincarnation, just unauthorized entry, a paper trail, a record, a shield. The next gathering was Daniel's dad's birthday at a Korean BBQ spot in Tacoma Public, noisy, full of witnesses. Sun Hee behaved like nothing happened. Gina sat too close to me and whispered, You look stressed. Maybe you should take time off. I sipped water. Maybe you should get a job. Her smile sharpened. At least I'm not hated by my husband's family. I leaned closer. At least I'm not a grown woman living off my parents and calling it culture. Her cheeks flushed. Then she laughed loudly. For the table. See? She's crazy. Always attacking. Sun-hee's eyes flicked, calculating. Later, I went to the restroom and checked my purse. My anxiety medication, prescribed, documented, was gone. They wanted to plant it. They wanted to build the unstable Megan story early. So I called the police right there, right then, before they had time to stage anything. When the officer arrived, Gina went white. Sun-hee hissed. "You are embarrassing." I smiled at her. "You should hate theft more than embarrassment." The officer found the pill bottle shoved behind paper towels in the restroom trash. Gina sputtered excuses. Sun-hee tried to talk over the cop, and I stood there, calm, while strangers stared, because now it wasn't private. Now it wasn't their house. Now it was a report. A pattern. Gina was sighted. Sun-hee's eyes burned into me as we left, and I knew the war had turned open, which meant the end would come faster. 2 nights later, the accident attempt arrived. It was subtle, quiet, slow. I was home alone when my carbon monoxide detector chirped. Once. Then again, I froze. I ran outside barefoot, phone shaking in my hand, and called 911. Firefighters found the gas stove on flameout, leaking just enough to kill. Someone had been in my home. My camera footage would tell me who. When Daniel got home, he saw the firefighters and went pale. "Megan, are you okay?" I looked at him. "I'm okay," I said, because I didn't go to bed. Then I pulled up the footage. Sun-hee, using the emergency key. Sun-hee, turning the stove knob. Sun-hee, leaving. Daniel watched it once and went still. His voice came out thin. She did that." I nodded. "Yes." His hand shook. "We're calling the police." We did. This time, it wasn't gossip. It wasn't feelings. It wasn't cultural misunderstanding. It was video. Sun-hee was arrested for unlawful entry and reckless endangerment. The detective, a tired-eyed woman who looked like she'd seen every version of family do ugly things, said quietly, "You're lucky you had detectors." I stared back and thought, I wasn't lucky. I was reborn. But out loud, I only said, "I know." Sun-hee got out on bail. A temporary protection order was issued. She was ordered to stay away from me, our home, and Daniel. But people like Sun-hee don't respect paper. They test it. Gina started posting online about evil wives and family betrayal. Relatives texted Daniel non-stop. Church women showed up at his job with food and guilt. Daniel looked like he was being pulled apart. One night he said, "Maybe we should move." I stared at him. "Why should we run?" He swallowed. "Because they won't stop." "I know," I said. "So we finish it." We moved anyway quietly, strategically, into a new place under an LLC, with new locks and cameras. Not because I wanted to hide, because I wanted control of the battlefield. Daniel filed for a longer no-contact order. His dad called, pleading. "She is your mother." Daniel's voice was flat. "She tried to poison my wife." Silence. Then his dad whispered, "She didn't mean..." "Stop!" Daniel snapped. That was the first time I heard him sound like a husband instead of a son. And it hurt, because I knew what it cost him. But grief is cheaper than funerals. I'd learned that the hard way. Sun-hee begged for mediation through a respected church elder, Pastor Kim, to restore peace. Marisol told us to go with witnesses and recording. We sat in a beige church meeting room under fluorescent lights, while Sun-hee performed remorse like she'd practiced in a mirror. "Megan," she said, voice trembling perfectly, "I'm sorry. I was stressed. I love you." Pastor Kim looked at me kindly. "Megan, can you accept?" I smiled politely. "No." The room froze. "No?" Pastor Kim blinked. "No," I repeated. "I can accept apologies for hurt feelings. I can't accept apologies for attempted homicide." Gina gasped. "How dare you say that in church? How dare you steal my medication and call me crazy?" I replied, calm. "How dare you help your mother break into my home?" Sun-hee's performance slipped. "You are lying." I slid a printed still frame across the table Sun-hee's hand on the stove knob. Pastor Kim's face went pale. Is this..." "Yes," I said. "And the police have the full video." Sun-hee's eyes sharpened. "You want to ruin me," she hissed. I leaned forward. "I want you to stop trying to bury me." Pastor Kim swallowed hard. "Sun-hee, is this true?" Sun-hee's mouth curled. "I did what I had to do," she said coldly. She was destroying my family. My heart went still, because there, it was motive spoken out loud, not legal language, truth. Pastor Kim's hands shook. Gina's face twisted with fury. "You're a witch," Gina spat. "You stole him." Daniel stood so fast, his chair scraped. "Enough," he snapped. "Get away from her." Pastor Kim stammered, about prayer. I shook my head. "You should testify," I said softly. Sun-hee smiled thinly. "Family protects family." I met her eyes. Not anymore. We walked out, and Sun-hee called after us. "You will regret this." I didn't turn around. Regret was for women still trying to be liked. I was trying to be alive. Court moved slowly. Like it always does, paperwork, dates, continuances. Sunny's lawyer tried to discredit me with therapy records and stress. They asked if I was sensitive to cultural differences. I answered calmly. "I'm sensitive to gas leaks," I said once, and the courtroom murmured. But here's what Sun-hee didn't expect. America doesn't care about your tradition when you forge signatures and mess with insurance. Marisol helped me pull records, and we found a small life insurance policy Sun-hee had opened on me in the past, naming herself as beneficiary for funeral expenses, using a forged signature. Daniel stared at the paperwork and whispered, "Sick. That's my signature." "It's not," I said softly. "It's hers." We handed it to the prosecutor. Suddenly, Sun-hee wasn't just a controlling mother-in-law. She was a woman with a pattern, a motive, and a paper trail. And paper trails are the one language the system listens to without translation. The prosecutor subpoenaed Pastor Kim. Gina panicked and tried to flip the script online, posting that I was unstable, that I was making up delusions, which was funny, in the darkest way, because they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know I'd already seen the end of their story once, and I was rewriting it. The climax came at Lunar New Year, not because I wanted drama, but because Sun-hee did. She insisted on hosting a community banquet to restore her reputation. She thought she could drown my evidence in tradition and noise. She invited the whole community, family, friends, church members, business owners. She sent a formal invitation to Daniel, like he was still her son. Daniel didn't want to go. Marisol did. "We go," she said. "If she violates the order in public, it's undeniable." So we went. Me, Daniel, Kayla, and 2 friends. And we went with plainclothes officers, already in the room. The hall was bright and loud. Red lanterns hanging, gold banners, kids weaving between tables. Sun-hee sat at the front, like a queen. Gina sat beside her, wearing white, like innocence was a costume. Daniel's dad sat silently, eyes down. Sun-hee spotted me, and froze for half a second. Then her smile returned, wide and fake. "Megan," she said loudly. "You came." I smiled. "Of course. I didn't want to miss family." Her eyes narrowed. "Family," she repeated. I nodded. "Yes. That thing you tried to kill me for." Her smile twitched. Sun-hee took the microphone for her speech. "Family is everything," she said warmly. "Sometimes there is misunderstanding, but we forgive, we love, we move forward." People clapped. Then she looked at Daniel, voice trembling theatrically. "My son, I miss you," the room murmured. Then she turned toward me. "And Megan, I forgive you too, even though you hurt me." There it was, the pivot, the victim costume. I stood. Kayla squeezed my hand. "Do it," she whispered. I walked to the stage, heart steady, and gently took the microphone from Sun-hee's hand, like I was taking a tray from a hostess. The room went quiet. "My name is Megan Parker," I said, and the exact second my mother-in-law realized I remembered how she killed me. Happened right here when she tried to toast family, while her court date is still pending. Gasps rippled. Sun-hee lunged forward. "Stop," she hissed. I lifted a hand. "No," I said calmly. "You don't get silence anymore." I nodded toward the AV table. Kayla hit play. The screen lit up with footage. Sun-hee entering my home with a key, turning the stove knob, leaving. Then the life insurance paperwork, Daniel's forged signature. Then the theft citation. Then audio from the church meeting. Sun-hee's cold voice saying, "I did what I had to do." The ballroom went dead silent, except for the speakers. Sun-hee's face drained of color. People whispered, "What is that? She did that? Is that illegal?" Sunhee screamed. Lies! I turned toward her, microphone steady. You pushed me once, I said loud enough for everyone. You don't get to push the story too. Gina stood up, shaking. You're insane, I smiled at her. Say that again, I said. Say it into the microphone while you're violating the no contact order. Her mouth snapped shut. Because yes, Sunhee and Gina had approached me. And yes, the officers were already moving. One of them caught Sunhee's arm gently. Ma'am, he said calmly, you need to step back. Sunhee's eyes widened, furious. Who are you? Law enforcement, he replied. You're in violation. Chairs scraped. Phones lifted. The crowd erupted into whispers and shock. Sunhee shrieked. This is my event. My community. I met her eyes. This is my life, I said. Daniel stood up then. Finally, voice steady and loud. Mom, he said. You don't own me. Sunhee's face crumpled. Daniel, you tried to kill my wife, he said, and the entire room went quiet in a deeper, heavier way. Gina started crying, loud and performative. Oppa, she's lying. Daniel looked at her like she was a stranger. Don't call me that, he said. Sunhee was handcuffed in front of her community, and for the first time since I woke up reborn, my lungs filled like I'd been holding my breath for years. I looked at the crowd and said, clearly, if someone tells you, family means you owe them your life. Run. Family is supposed to protect you, not bury you. Then I set the microphone down and walked away while Sunhee's wails echoed behind me. After the banquet, the parking lot air hit me cold and clean. Daniel's hands were shaking as he opened the car door for me. Kayla exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all night. I think I just watched a whole dynasty collapse, she muttered. I sat in the passenger seat and stared straight ahead. Daniel got in, swallowed hard, and whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't look at him yet. For what part? He flinched. For all of it. For being quiet. For letting you fight alone. I turned toward him. His face was wrecked, red eyes, tight jaw, grief written into his posture. In my first life, I would have soothed him. In my second, I told the truth. You don't get to apologize and call it healing, I said softly. You get to change. He nodded, tears spilling. I will. I believed him because I had proof now, too. Not proof on video. Proof in the fact he'd finally stood up in public and chosen me when it cost him everything he'd been trained to protect. And yes, part of my revenge was watching Sunhee lose her power. But the deeper revenge, the one that actually mattered, was watching Daniel stop being her property. Sunhee's bail was revoked after the banquet violation. The case accelerated. Prosecutors don't love messy family drama, but they do love clear evidence. The forged life insurance paperwork opened a separate investigation. Gina was charged with theft and witness intimidation after she tried to explain the medication incident to a detective with a story that didn't match the report. Daniel's dad, June, was forced to testify about the keys and the family pressure. He sat on the stand and cried, saying, I didn't stop her. That is my shame. And for the first time, I saw him not as a silent accomplice, but as a man who'd lived under Sunhee's control. So long he thought silence was survival. It didn't excuse him, but it explained the shape of their household. Sunhee tried one last performance in court, crying, saying she was confused, saying she loved her daughter-in-law. The judge watched the footage of her turning my stove knob and leaving. The judge listened to the audio of her saying, I did what I had to do, and the judge's face hardened in a way that told me Sunhee was finally meeting something she couldn't manipulate, a system that didn't care about her family title. Sunhee was convicted, not because I told a dramatic story, because I brought receipts, because cameras don't care about tradition, because paper doesn't care about shame. Gina took a plea deal and still tried to glare at me like I stole something from her. Maybe I did. I stole her favorite toy, control. When it was over, Marisol hugged me in the courthouse hallway and said, You did this the right way. I swallowed. It didn't feel right. It rarely does, she said. But you're alive. That's the point. Daniel and I didn't stay in Seattle. Not because we were running, because we were choosing. We moved to a different city in the same state, close enough for jobs. Far enough that the old community couldn't reach us easily. Daniel went to therapy. Real therapy. Not family will fix it. We rebuilt slowly. Not as the couple who survived drama, as two adults learning what marriage looks like when you stop inviting your abuser to dinner. One night, months later, Daniel asked softly, "Do you ever feel guilty?" I stared at our quiet living room, the kind of peace that used to feel impossible. "Sometimes," I admitted. Then I remember the sound my carbon monoxide detector made, and I stopped. He nodded, eyes wet. "I don't deserve you." I shook my head. "Don't say that," I said. "Say this. You're becoming someone who deserves the life you want." He swallowed and nodded again. And that was the lesson my second life carved into me. Love without boundaries is just a pretty form of self-erasure. Family isn't a license to harm you. Tradition isn't a weapon you're required to bleed for. And if someone tries to bury you in silence, whether with shame, or paperwork, or an accident, you don't owe them peace. You owe yourself truth, because the only thing better than revenge is a life they can't reach anymore.